Right Side Nation, Mike Hanley here with RightSideNews.com. It is July the 3rd. It's about 8 p.m. out on the West Coast. I'm looking forward to tomorrow, the 4th of July, Independence Day. I will be wearing the red, white, and blue. Right now, I'm wearing an Italy kit. I'm a big soccer fan. The U.S. isn't playing in the World Cup. Italy's not playing in the World Cup. Holland's not playing in the World Cup. Chile isn't playing in the World Cup. I mean, I feel like Messi and Ronaldo are both out, but hey, that's okay. That's okay. But we've seen some crazy things been going on, not only in the world of soccer, but here at home in the United States of America. And do not worry, my friends. I'll be bleeding red, white, blue tomorrow. I cannot wait. It's a beautiful day. And I'm just so thankful to be American. So very thankful. So shout out to all the patriots out there, all the people that are on the Trump train, all the people that are hopping on, also all of the people that are walking away from the Democratic Party or the Democrat Party, as Trump would say. It is the Democratic Party. So I'm super excited about tomorrow, but I wanted to hop on today and do a little bit of insight on the Supreme Court of the United States on the federal level, and then also what's going on with Judge Anthony Kennedy's retirement and then his potential replacement. So there are a couple of options. I believe Trump has it narrowed down to a couple of judges. Obviously anything can happen. Apparently, the decision is going to become on July the 9th. And so I just kind of wanted to touch on that, talk a little bit about the potential replacements and also kind of some of the recent rulings of the Supreme Court, and also just how imperative it is to have justices that look at the Constitution as a written document, rather than a living, breathing document. And what I mean by that is that when the document of the Constitution is interpreted as written, rather than a living, breathing document that can be changed based on someone's personal opinion. And I am a firm believer that the document of the Constitution is an absolutely timeless document that was designed to last over time and uphold the rule of law in this country. Now, of course, we have amendments to the Constitution, and that those are designed for the betterment of our country. However, the Constitution is the basis of which the Supreme Court should and does make their rulings. So I'm going to jump in here a little bit. I'm going to change the screen, take a look here at Justice Anthony Kennedy, and he is saying hello to Trump. And Kennedy's Kennedy was appointed by Ronald Reagan in 1987. That's an easy year to remember because I myself was born in 1987. So this guy has been on the Supreme Court for as long as I've been alive. That's a pretty impressive feat, in my personal opinion. And while we're at it, Kennedy is getting out, not necessarily getting out, but he is retiring from the Supreme Court while he is still able to perform his job. Now, the Supreme Court, in my personal opinion, should no longer have lifetime appointments. The appointments, in terms of the rule of law, were set for life when these laws were written. So, Supreme Court nominee or justice who is appointed will be on the Supreme Court for life. And I find that a bit troubling because people now live a hell of a lot longer and have the capability of living even through old age, and then also even if they are very sick and diseased. So It's, I understand it's a sensitive subject. I don't hope anybody on the Supreme Court dies for whatever reason, but I also think it's important to say, hey, you've been on the Supreme Court for, let's say, 30, 35, 40 years. Maybe it's time, you step down. So just like people in Congress are potentially looking at term limits, I think that there should be limits in how long or how old somebody can be on the Supreme Court. So I just kind of want to put that 2 cents in there. Of the two federal judges that are potential nominees, is Judge Brett Kavanaugh, and then also Circuit Court Judge Amy Coney Barrett. And I'll go ahead and pull up. Here's Brett Kavanaugh. There's a picture of Brett Kavanaugh, who was the District of Columbia Circuit Court Judge appointed by George W. Bush. And we have Judge Amy Coney Barrett, who graduated from the University of Notre Dame, who is a Chicago Circuit Court judge as well. So these are the two potential replacements, I believe, for Justice Anthony Kennedy. And, we'll see who Trump picks. Again, the announcement is supposed to come on about July the 9th. So I kind of wanted to get into a couple interesting topics or cases, specific cases that have come up. And I think the commentary will speak specifically on some of these issues. So I'm going to go ahead and now I think you can see me now down here in the corner just in case you want to see this mug that I have here. Anyhow, so there was a gentleman, and this is a very known and well publicized case. It was the gentleman who was the baker, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of him denying baking a cake for someone based on their sexual orientation, meaning who they prefer to be with, either a man and a man or a woman and a woman. So, in my personal opinion, I find this to be a very interesting ruling, especially in light of what we've seen going on with Sarah Sanders, because what happened with Sarah Sanders, in my personal opinion, is very similar to what went on with Baker Jack Phillips, who had refused to bake a wedding cake for a gay couple. So there's a couple that comes into Jack Phillips' bakery. They're a homosexual couple. He denies them baking the cake for them. Essentially, he's not going to bake the cake for them, and then they go to the courts and file a grievance. Well, on the other hand, you have Sarah Sanders, who is the White House press secretary, who was denied service at the Red Hen. Now, this case with Jack Phillips that has been taken to the Supreme Court was a far more politicized event and just blown up by the mainstream media, essentially calling the guy a bigot because he wouldn't bake the cake for him. But in my personal opinion, I think it's anybody in this country, especially who owns their own business and is a free person, has the right to refuse service to anyone if they so choose. If they so choose. So I find this very interesting because there's two sides of it. The left wants to go ahead and say, "Oh, Jack Phillips is a bigot," and then you have on the other side they're cheering the Red Hen and the owners of the Red Hen for not for denying service to Sarah Sanders because she's part of the Trump administration. So I find it all very interesting. It all tends to come full circle. You know, when I sit here and I look at these these cases and just the selective outrage from the left, a lot of times I see this stuff and I'm like, well, isn't this with Jack Phillips the equivalent of what happened with the Red Hen and Sarah Sanders? So why was the left so outraged with Jack Phillips, but they're not outraged with the Red Hen? And I think it's all because there are certain instances that um, fulfill their narrative of a certain type of thinking, and then if you don't do this or you're on their side, then they'll berate you or shame you into trying to do something or retract a statement. When on the other hand, the same thing is happening to Sarah Sanders and her family that happened to the gay couple in this instance. And I said it before, like I did in the other video previously. You're a free person, you have your own business, you're in the United States of America. If you decide you want to refuse service to whomever for pretty much whatever reason, I believe that you have the right to do it. So I don't really get the selective outrage, but I wanted to highlight this case because this is one of the cases that um, was really blown up by the mainstream media. This is a tweet from @GayRepublicSwag. I'm gay and I support the SCOTUS ruling. Just as gay people are free to be gay, religious people need to be free to practice their religion. This isn't an attack on gays, it's a defense of liberty. So I find this very interesting. This is a gay Republican who is in support of the ruling that protects someone's right not to have to bake a cake based on their religious practices. So I just found it interesting because, you know, the narrative goes that most of the gay people aren't voting Republican or are liberal. I don't know if that's really as true as it once was. I feel like there's a lot more people that are starting to see what's really going on in politics, what's really going on in the Democrat Party, and some of the changes that are being made. And I think more and more people are waking up to this. Just like you have the walk away. You have the walk away movement right now where people, you know, used to be in support of traditional Democrat policies, which are there to support the blue collar workers of America. Well, I think the Democrat Party has gotten farther and farther away from that. And I think perhaps now, surprisingly, is that the Republican Party does represent the coal miners, the hardworking Americans, not just Wall Street, but all Americans, especially in regards to the economy, which is booming right now. Again, this just talks about Mike Phillips. It looks like it's a tweet from Mike Cernovich. I follow Cernovich. I recommend you do it as well. Had the opportunity to meet him one time. He's a good dude, pretty laid back. But anyhow, yeah. So just another tweet there. Just figured I'd show that, and then here's that tweet. So look, this is the narrow decision the Supreme Court sided with Baker, who turned away a gay couple. Here's an interesting one, and I wasn't that aware of this one, but it looks like the Supreme Court of the United States gives Trump a victory. The ACLU was defeated. So the idea that illegals must return to their country to get an abortion. So um, there are tax dollars in America used typically through Planned Parenthood to perform abortions on um, on American citizens, women, and where these women go and have abortions. But the ruling stands essentially that if an illegal immigrant comes to this country illegally, obviously, if they are an illegal immigrant, then they do not have the right to receive an abortion um, in regards to taxpayer dollars. So an illegal immigrant cannot come to this country and get an abortion that is going to be paid for by the taxpayers of this country, which makes complete sense. They're illegal. They're not here legally. So it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to spend money on someone to have an abortion if they're not here legally in the first place. So here's this article here from the Blaze. So the decision is a victory because it at least temporarily eliminates a precedent set by the lower court that allowed other illegal immigrant teenagers in these circumstances to receive abortion on government time. And then also, I want to go ahead and go back right here to Judge Amy Coney Barrett. And here's why, because it talks about her unusual frank. Um, she's unusually frank in her consideration to overturn precedents set by the Supreme Court. Now, I think this is also very interesting because um, the precedent is set forth based on earlier rulings. So if there is precedent based on, let's say, abortion, the precedent is Roe versus Wade. And the reason I bring this one up is I think there's a lot more scientific information that is out now than there was back when Roe versus Wade was first heard. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because if you look at there's when the ruling was set forth, I think there was limited information in regards to how maybe an infant is growing in the womb of a woman in terms of when they have feeling, when their heart starts to beat, their development, so on and so forth. So I think there's often this idea that Republicans across the board don't like to use science, like we don't like the myth of global warming or perhaps the reality of global warming. I don't think anyone really knows. People now use climate change. So it's this idea that, you know, there's a precedent that has been set forth, but was that precedent based on sound factual knowledge? And that's why I find this intriguing with Amy Barrett, is because she is willing to go back and overturn a precedent, perhaps Roe versus Wade. I'm not necessarily saying Roe versus Wade, but what I'm saying is that is uh, that is always a Supreme Court ruling that is highly scrutinized. And so if we're looking at this, there always talks about overturning Roe versus Wade or reversing it. I'm not saying one way or another, but the more information you have and the more scientific data, the better, the more likely the Supreme Court can rule on something accurately if the information is better and more sound. And I'm saying that today in 2018 versus the original ruling of Roe versus Wade, I'm sure there's a lot more highly technologically developed equipment that can give us information that we need to make better sound decisions, not only for women who are pregnant, but also women who are considering abortion or women who are sick during pregnancy and all of these different things. So this technology is going to allow us to have a more sound judgment, a better understanding of why and when certain things happen with babies in the womb. So I find it interesting that this lady is willing to overturn precedents. I mean, I'm not saying this is a great thing, but I also think it's something to to touch on, just because I think we need forward-thinking people, people who can think outside the box. Talking about thinking outside the box, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she said she would not look to the U.S. Constitution to see Ruth Bader Ginsburg not speak of the Constitution in a high regard. She talks about the Constitution of South Africa or the European Convention on Human Rights, saying that they are more recent documents than the U.S. Constitution. Now, just because the documents are more recent in terms of the South African Constitution or the European Convention on Human Rights, does that necessarily mean that they're better documents in general? I'm not so sure. And so the question begs has Ruth Bader Ginsburg um, had a change of heart in her beliefs on the Constitution since she's been sitting on the Supreme Court. So I think these are just legitimate questions to ask about any justice, like I talked about earlier in this recording and in this video, that I think it's extremely imperative to appoint justices that will see the Constitution as a written document rather than a living, breathing document. And also, the question begs: Do we need do we need to set age limits and term limits potentially on the Supreme Court? Now, I understand that we shouldn't be continually um, hiring new judges all the time, because I think that when these justices are appointed, they go through a very stringent process in being vetted for this position, and we hire our very best legal minds in the country to be put on the Supreme Court. So I'm not saying we need to have a lot of turnover, but I am saying, do we need an age limit? Do we need a term limit for these judges that are on the Supreme Court? Maybe it's 30 years, like I said. Maybe it's a little bit longer. So I just wanted to put this together for you guys. I hope it was beneficial to you all. See about a little bit about who might be appointed, some of the recent rulings of the Supreme Court. I also wanted to show um, this ruling here. It talks about 1.7 billion, and that was the amount of political contributions from big labor unions in the United States in the 2016 presidential election. And here's why I think this is so important. And here's a picture. If I'm somebody who is a union contributor and I am forced to give funds to this union, and they decide to use those political funds to promote or back a certain candidate, I find that troubling, because if I'm somebody who's putting my funds in to a union and they are spending these dollars in a way which I don't think is advantageous to the country, that raises a red flag for me. You see here there was $1,292,000,000 spent by big labor in the 2016 presidential election. Now, the real question is, could those funds be used for a better, be used in a better way? Whether that's to support my retirement, or if I want to put my kids through college, or whatever. These are the questions that have to be asked, and I think this graph here, this pie chart, shows how much money is being spent on political campaigns in our country. And then this is one thing that I think Bernie Sanders had right, that there was way too much money that was being pumped into political campaigns. Way too much money. So, anyways, I just wanted to sit in, talk to you guys a little bit today about what I see going on. This is Mike Hanley with RightSideNews.com. Thank you, Right Side Nation. Don't be left, be right.